Chapter 1. The Silent House. It seems impossible to feel so happy and so sad all at the same time. Laughter and tears, not what you'd expect for someone in my situation. Maybe, in time, the future, in which I am so confident, will cancel out the bad memories of the past. There's so much to look forward to, after all. But there's so much to remember, too. It all started on the day that my wife disappeared. Well, no, that's not quite true. It had started a long time before that, only I didn't know anything about it. That just shows you how stupid I was. Things were happening right in front of my nose, and I never even realized. I should have seen the signs, but I was blind to them. On that particular day, I came home after a rehearsal. I opened the door and walked into the house. I put my viola case on the floor, took off my coat and hung it up. Then I took my viola into our music room. I wanted to look through some of the new quartet music before the next rehearsal. That's when I noticed my wife's old trumpet, the one she'd played for the last 10 years. It wasn't in its case. It was on top of the piano, as if she'd abandoned it in the middle of a practice. That was strange. My wife always left her instrument in its case. Perhaps she'd just gone upstairs for a minute. But then I noticed the silence in the house. You could feel it. I went into the kitchen. There was a coffee cup in the sink. It hadn't been washed. That was strange, too. My wife never left dirty cups in the sink. I went upstairs. The bed was unmade. Now I was really worried. Then I noticed the cupboard. It was open, emptier than usual. Suddenly I started to get frightened. I ran into the middle bedroom, the room she used as an office. I opened the cupboard door there. One of our suitcases was missing. For a moment I stood there, my mind refusing to accept what was in front of my eyes. I thought somebody had taken her clothes and stolen her suitcase. Then I remembered the trumpet on the piano. Perhaps she had gone somewhere. But where? Why hadn't she told me? Then I thought, oh no, perhaps someone has kidnapped her, forced her to go away. But something told me this wasn't true, and I sat down on the chair in front of her computer. I tried to think, but all I could see was her face, last night, in that Italian restaurant, smiling at me through the candle flame. She had been so kind, so beautiful. We hadn't argued at all. It was the happiest evening for ages. I thought everything was all right again. I looked out of the window at the park behind our house. 5:30 in the afternoon on a beautiful late August afternoon. Children were playing in the sunshine. The old man was walking his dog, talking to it sometimes, before pulling it forward on its lead. He walked his dog at the same time every day. Malgosia and I used to watch him and laugh together, but lately we hadn't been laughing very much at all. And that's when I knew, suddenly, that she'd gone for good. That's why she was so loving yesterday. She was saying goodbye. I rushed downstairs to the hall, my heart beating far too fast. I couldn't find our address book in its usual place. I ran into the music room and got my electronic organizer from my viola case. My fingers were shaking so much that it was difficult to make the damn thing work, but I found Rosemary's number in the end and dialed it. Rosemary was my wife's best friend. "Rosemary," I said when she answered. "Where is Malgosia? Where's she gone?" "Who is this?" she answered, confused. "Derek? Is that you?" "Yes," I said. "Of course it's me. Where is she?" "Derek, what's the matter? You sound terrible. What are you talking about?" "Malgosia," I said. "Where is she?" "I don't know," Rosemary said. I could hear her children in the background. "Isn't she there?" "Of course she isn't here. That's why I'm asking you," I shouted. "There's no need to talk to me like that," she said angrily. I forced myself to calm down and apologized. Rosemary asked me to tell her what the matter was, so I did. "You're not going to like this, Derek," she said when I'd finished, "but I haven't got any idea where she is. I mean, I knew you weren't that happy together." "What?" I interrupted. "What did you say?" She must have been worried by the tone of my voice. "Oh, nothing," she said. "Nothing. Just that Margie," that's what she called her, "said that sometimes you and she, well, that life wasn't always very much fun." "So you knew she was going to leave?" I insisted. No, of course I didn't," Rosemary replied, and I wondered whether to believe her. "Look, Derek," she went on, "I'm sorry, I've got to go, but I'll ring you this evening, all right? I don't know anything about this, honestly." "You can't go now!" I cried. I was desperate. "Hey, Derek," she said, cutting in. "It's Wednesday, isn't it?" "Yes, but—" "So have you rung the theatre? They might know something." The theatre, of course. Why hadn't I thought of that? I slammed down the telephone receiver without saying goodbye. Then I picked it up again and dialed the number of the Drury Lane Theatre Royal. That's where Malgosia was playing trumpet 3 nights a week in the musical Miss Saigon. In a few minutes I was talking to Duncan Gardner, the musical director of the orchestra for the show. "Duncan," I said, "is Malgosia there?" "No, of course not." "Why, of course not?" I asked. "She's left the band," he said, sounding surprised. "She's what?" "Derek," he said. "What's going on? I don't understand. She said that she was going away. I thought she was going somewhere with you." "Do you know where she was going?" I asked. "Derek, what on earth is going on?" "Did she say where she was going?" I asked again. "No, she just said she was leaving England." "Leaving England?" "Yes," he said, "leaving England." I sat there with my mind in chaos. Leaving England? But where was she going? The world is a big place. "Derek? Derek, are you all right?" I heard Duncan say. "Sure," I replied. "I'm fine," and I put down the receiver. I looked at myself in the mirror above the telephone and saw my terrified face, the face of a man whose wife had left him. I felt like a fool. I didn't want to make the next call, but I couldn't think what else to do. I dialed the number of Malgosia's parents in Warsaw. Perhaps my wife had run back to Poland, her country, the country she had left when she came to study music in London 10 years before. Someone picked up the phone in Warsaw. They spoke in Polish, which was not surprising, of course, but it's a language I've never been able to use. "Hello," I said. "Is that Teresa?" Teresa is Malgosia's mother. The voice on the other end said something more in Polish. I couldn't understand a word of it. "Can I speak to Teresa?" I said. "This is Derek, from England. Malgosia's husband." There was a silence at the other end of the line. Then the voice started speaking again, quickly, trying to tell me something. I suddenly realized that it was Malgosia's grandmother. She didn't speak a word of English, and I couldn't say anything in Polish. So I said goodbye and put down the phone. I went to the kitchen and got a bottle of wine. I opened it and poured myself a glass and drank it. Then I poured another and another. I wondered what to do. It was beginning to get dark outside. I thought of Malgosia sitting at the kitchen table opposite me, the two of us sitting in silence. There had been a lot of silence recently. I thought of Malgosia practicing in the music room, the beautiful sound of her trumpet echoing through the house. Would I ever hear that sound again? I thought of Malgosia sitting in her office, tapping at the keys of her computer, investigating all those sites on the internet, talking to people all over the world, while I stayed downstairs watching television. Suddenly I sat up straight. That's it, I told myself. That's it, the computer. Maybe I would learn something from the computer. I ran up to her office and switched her machine on. I went straight to her emails, hoping to find some clue, some indication of where she might have gone, and I was instantly rewarded. There was a message in the file marked Incoming Mail, which she must have read earlier in the day. I pointed the mouse at it and clicked. When the message appeared, I read it, and then read it again, trying to understand it. The words in front of me just didn't seem to make much sense. Malgosia, where are you? I'll try and ring you, but in case I can't get through, things are getting a bit difficult. Get here quick, otherwise I'll be in trouble. You'll love Rio. I promise. Tibor. Tibor. It was the first time I'd heard that name for many years. Of course, it might not be the Tibor I was thinking of, but somehow in my heart I knew immediately that it was, and I felt all the anger and hurt all over again. There was a loud knocking at the front door. I switched off the computer and went downstairs. So much had happened that I couldn't think straight. Tibor? Rio? Did that mean Rio de Janeiro? I opened the door. 2 policemen were standing there. "Mr. Armstrong?" one of them said. "Yes," I answered. "What's happened? Is something wrong?" "The police only come to your door when something terrible has happened." "Is Mrs. Armstrong in?" the first policeman asked, ignoring my question. "Malgosia Armstrong," he said, pronouncing it with an S sound instead of the sh sound it should have. No, she isn't. Why do you want her?" "Are you sure she isn't here, sir?" the second policeman said. "Of course I'm sure," I answered back. "Why? What's this all about?" "We just want to ask Mrs. Armstrong a few questions," said the first policeman. "Questions? What about?" I asked. "I think, sir," said the first policeman, "it would be a good idea if we came inside. Don't you?" Chapter 2. Tibor and Malgosia. The first time I saw my wife, she was laughing. It was in the canteen at the Royal Academy of Music in Marylebone Road, London. I had arrived there 2 weeks before to start my 3-year course as a music student, studying the viola as my first instrument. My parents hadn't wanted me to be a music student. Even my mother, for whom music was almost as important as eating and breathing, and who wanted me to love music too, thought that it wasn't the right kind of career for me if I wanted to get on in the world. Instead, she and my father wanted me to be a doctor like he was. But I was never very good at science, and anyway, I hated the sight of blood. I was probably a bit of a coward, I suppose. I wasn't very good at sport, either. I suppose you could say that I was always crazy about music. My mother was a fantastic pianist when I was a child. She didn't earn money from it, except for the few pupils who used to come to her for lessons at the weekend. But all through my childhood I would hear her playing beautiful music, sometimes late on summer evenings as I lay listening in my bed. I learned to love the sound of her playing as I went to sleep. Later I realized that music, for my mother, was a secret world that she felt safe in, a world where my father was on the outside looking in, a world where she was the boss and where her imagination was set free. I think my mother wanted me to discover that world too, so I started violin lessons when I was only 6. I loved it immediately, and some of my happiest memories of childhood are of the times when I made music on my little violin and my mother accompanied me on the piano. Later, my teacher told me that I could change to the viola, because then I would get into all the orchestras I wanted to. There are never enough viola players, he told me, so you'll always be wanted. And he was right. The moment I started on the viola, I got into school orchestras and later youth orchestras with very little trouble. Although violas are only slightly bigger than violins, you have to play them differently. They have their own unique sound. They're not superstars like violins, but they make all the nice noises inside the music, all the beautiful harmonies. Violas are modest, but they're charming, warm, and loving, everything I hoped I could be. Gradually, as I went through school, I spent more and more time doing music, and less time studying anything else. In the end, my parents had to admit that I would never get to university with my poor marks, but a career in music was just a possibility. And so, even though my father really disapproved, and he told me so about 3 times a week, he agreed to let me go to music college to study viola and piano. It was all I could do, and it was all I wanted to do. I have a clear memory of that morning when I met Malgosia. It was 2 weeks into my 3-year course. I came down the stairs after a viola lesson, which had demonstrated to me how much I still had to learn. I wasn't having much success socially either, and just occasionally I wondered whether my father had been right. I opened the canteen doors, still nervous about being a new boy, still unsure about whether I really belonged there. I walked into the canteen and queued up to get some coffee. Behind me I could hear people talking and laughing, men's voices, women's voices. I paid for my coffee and turned round. There was a large group of people around a table. They were all listening to someone sitting next to the wall. Although I didn't know many of the other students yet, I recognized the person who was talking. He was famous at the academy. He was a 3rd-year student, and his name, I had been told, was Tibor. He was half English, half Albanian, and one of the characters at college. He was a brilliant pianist and trumpet player, and he was studying conducting. Everybody said he would be the next Schulte, a Karajan for the 21st century. They said he made magic when he stood up in front of an orchestra. They said people would do anything for him, anything at all. With him, they took musical risks they would never take with any of the other conducting students. And he got the girls. One 3rd-year viola player who had talked to me, 3rd-years don't usually talk to 1st-years, said that everyone had to fall in love with Tibor at least once. She had, she said, but she was over it now. I wasn't convinced by that last bit. I stood and looked at him. He was sitting back in his chair, a tall, thin, dark-haired man with bright, laughing eyes and a wide, sensual mouth. Even I could see that he was incredibly good-looking. Even I could tell that he knew it. I don't think I have ever met anyone, before or since, who was so sure of himself. He looked up and saw me standing there, a frightened first year, with a pile of music in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. I thought he would ignore me, but instead, turning to the people he was with, he said, "Now, who have we got here? What new musical being is this?" They all turned round and looked at me, laughing at the way he had asked the question. And that's when I saw Malgosia. She was laughing too, her beautiful head thrown back on her long neck, her mouth open to reveal perfect white teeth, her eyes shining with happiness. She was easily the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, with long red hair falling over her shoulders. I couldn't take my eyes off her. "Hey, whoever you are, stop staring at Malgosia and tell us who you are." Tibor had spoken again, and I had to tear my eyes away from the redhead. Even then I knew, somehow, that Tibor was dangerous. "I'm Derek," I said. "Derek Armstrong." "Well, Derek Armstrong, you'd better come and join us." It felt like an order. I looked for somewhere to sit. "Come on, you Polish beauty," he said to the redhead. "Move up so that Derek can sit on your chair too." He was laughing at me, but I couldn't refuse. I sat down and was immediately aware of Malgosia's intoxicating perfume and Tibor's irresistible charm. "So," said the handsome student of conducting, "what's your instrument, then? What do you study?" "Piano," I replied nervously. "And viola." "Ah," he smiled, "the viola." The people round the table laughed. You have to get used to that if you're a viola player. It's the instrument that everyone makes jokes about. "Hey," said a young man on my left, "what's the difference between a viola and a trampoline?" "Oh, no, not that old one," Tibor complained. "I don't know it," said Malgosia at my side. She had the most beautiful voice, crisp like April frost. "And what is what do you call it, a trampoline?" "It's a thing that gymnasts jump on, do cartwheels, boing, boing," explained the joke-teller, making movements with his arms. "Oh," said Malgosia. "Oh, I see." And she said a word in Polish to show that she understood. Since nobody else spoke her language, it was difficult to tell if she'd got it right. "So, what is the difference between a viola and a trampoline?" "Well," said the person on my left, "you have to take your shoes off to jump on a trampoline." There was a silence while the people who did not know the joke thought about it, and then they laughed. So did I, even though I'd heard the joke many times before. You have to laugh to show that you don't mind people making fun of you. It's like all jokes, though. When viola players tell viola jokes, I think they're funny. But when other people do it, I get all angry. "Here's one I heard yesterday," Tibor said, and instantly everyone turned towards him. "Perhaps you know it, Derek?" I still don't know why he paid attention to me that day. Perhaps he was bored. Perhaps he was looking for a new victim. I don't believe he ever liked me. "I don't know," I managed to say. "It depends." "Okay," he answered. "Let's see. Here goes. Imagine that you are lost in a forest, a terrible dark forest, and you are very frightened, and you want to leave the forest, but you don't know the way." He paused for dramatic effect. "Yes?" asked the joke-teller on my left. "Yes, go on." "Thank you, Justin," Tibor said. "So there you are, terrified and afraid, and it's getting dark. And suddenly you see figures coming towards you. In the darkness you realize that they are a pink elephant, a good viola player, and a bad viola player. And you know that one of them can tell you the way out of the forest. Who do you ask?" He looked round the group. Nobody answered. "You don't know?" he asked. "Well, then I'll tell you. You ask the bad viola player, because the other two only exist in your imagination." And he laughed. And then everyone laughed, and for some reason I went red. "Did you like that joke?" Malgosia asked me a couple of minutes later. Tibor had got tired of me and was talking to someone else. "Yes," I had to say. "I don't think you did. Not very much," she said. "Well, it's okay. I've heard it before." "Yes," she said. "But why do people make all these jokes about viola players? It is not the same in Poland." "I don't know. Why do people make jokes about Irish people, or Bavarians, or Polish people?" I said. "That is only in America, I think," Malgosia said. "But perhaps it means that we have something in common, something that is the same for both of us." She turned to me and looked at me with those big blue eyes of hers, and I knew that I was lost. "Hey, Malgosia," Tibor said, getting up. "We're going over to a Greek restaurant in Charlotte Street. Do you want to come?" "Me?" she said in surprise. "Me?" She was obviously delighted that he had asked her. Yes, of course." She got up, forgetting me immediately, and they all marched out of the canteen, leaving me sitting there, wondering if she or Tibor would ever speak to me again, and whether I wanted them to or not. Chapter 3. Rachel. Tibor and Malgosia became lovers, of course. Even when I think about that now, it hurts. After all this time, it still hurts. But there was nothing I could have done, even if I'd known how to. She fell for him almost immediately. Perhaps it was the scene in the canteen that did it for her. Perhaps it was later in some pub or cafe that she looked at him and felt the joyous pain that love can be. I don't know. I only know that when I realized what the situation was, I thought I would die with unhappiness. Because I was crazy about her too, absolutely obsessed with the thought of her. And though we were the best of friends, and she came to cry on my shoulder every time Tibor ignored her or cheated on her, and even though I was sure she was very fond of me, still she didn't love me like I, poor fool, loved her. Instead, I had to watch her eyes light up with excitement every time Tibor walked into the room. I had to learn to grin and bear it every time she cancelled one of our visits to the cinema or a folk club because she was going to be with him. I had to accept that, compared to Tibor, I would always be second best. One afternoon, a few weeks into that first term, I went into Duke's Hall because I could hear the sound of a trumpet. I pushed open the wood and glass doors. Malgosia was on the empty stage, making the most beautiful noise I had ever heard. Another student was accompanying her on the organ. They were playing the Trumpet Voluntary, one of the most famous English trumpet tunes there is. I stood and listened until she had finished. Then she saw me and smiled. "That was beautiful," I told her. "I love Purcell's music." "It's not Purcell," Malgosia said. "Everybody thinks he wrote it, but it was actually written by someone called Jeremiah Clark. I've been reading about it. Did you know," she went on, "he killed himself for love? It's the kind of thing they did in those days. Isn't it romantic?" "No," I laughed. "It's stupid, if you ask me." "Ah," she replied dreamily, "you are just a man, an English man. But to die for love, that takes a more passionate soul than yours, perhaps." At the end of the first year, when the summer holidays began, Malgosia went back to Poland to be with her family. Right up until the moment she left, I had this dream that she would invite me to visit her there, but somehow I knew that she wouldn't. My parents, who knew nothing of my romantic depression, wanted me to go on holiday with them, but with the arrogance of youth I couldn't stand the idea. I was much happier busking on the streets of London, playing for cinema queues and shopping tourists with the new student quartet I had joined at the end of the summer term. Our first violin player, Carl Robbins, was rather uneasy about playing Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik 10 times a day, because he'd rather be attempting Shostakovich and Bartok, and Rachel Marino, our cellist, was uncomfortable with the long metal spike, which allowed her to play standing up. "Still," as Matt Jenkins, the second violinist, said, "it's good performance practice, and we're earning quite a bit of money, too. No one's complaining about that." It was true. People seemed to like the way we played, and my open viola case soon filled up with small change. We earned even more when a law student who lived with me came to help us by going round our audiences with a hat, asking for donations. Ken, a Nigerian, wasn't very keen on the music we played, but he was a magician with the hat. He almost ran around the crowds that were listening to us, smiling at them, laughing and joking, telling them we were poor refugees, anything to make them put their hands in their pockets. It looked like it was going to be a good summer. Sometimes I even forgot about Malgosia, but not for long. One evening, as we packed up our instruments for the day, Rachel suggested that we go to a pub by the river in Chiswick, where she lived. The next day was Sunday, so we weren't going to play, and anyway, we needed a break. The others didn't want to go all that way, because it's a long journey from central London, but I had nothing better to do, so I agreed. It was a lovely evening. Rachel and I sat outside and watched the life of the river in front of us. There were birds, the sounds of a great city all around us, planes starting their final approach to Heathrow Airport, rowers shouting orders at each other, and a little police boat making its way downriver, its blue light flashing as it went as fast as it could towards some emergency. I liked Rachel. She was quiet and gentle. She had light brown hair and pretty brown eyes set in a round, pleasant face. When she smiled, she looked like a happy child, and you knew you could trust her. She was very easy to be with. That night we sat and talked about what we hoped for the future. I told her I wanted to make enough money as a musician to have a nice house, travel a bit, that kind of thing. She told me that her dreams were much the same. She wanted children one day, she said, but for that she'd need to find the right man. "Well, it's no good looking at me," I said as a joke. "I know that, you fool," she said, laughing at me. "You can't see anybody anyway, not while Malgosia is in the way." I blushed. "Maybe," I replied. I didn't like talking about it. "Can I say something?" Rachel asked nervously. "It depends what it is," I replied. Around us, people were talking and laughing as the night got darker. I saw the lights of a party boat travelling along the river in front of us. "It's just that, well, I know Malgosia is beautiful. I mean, really beautiful. I wish I was beautiful like that. And I do like her. But she's crazy about Tibor. And anyone who's crazy about Tibor, well..." She stopped and looked at me, wondering how I would react. "Well, what?" I answered. I understood what she was saying, I think, but I didn't like anyone criticizing Malgosia. "Oh, God, now you're cross with me," Rachel said. Sorry, but it's just a pity to see you and her. She's not right for you. You're wasting your time, wasting your life on her, and you're not getting anything back. It doesn't look good. That's my opinion." "Well," I snapped back without thinking, "I don't care what your opinion is, okay? Me and Malgosia, well, we're—" I wanted a word that meant more than friend, but I couldn't think of the right one. "We're special, all right? So it's none of your business. Just keep out of my affairs, okay?" Rachel had gone red, and I had gone too far. My only excuse is that I was very confused then, and still very young. But I suppose, if I'm honest, that wasn't it. It was because Rachel had said something that I didn't want to hear, because it was the truth. Now I think that if only I had listened to her then, if only I had understood what she was trying to tell me, I might not have made the decisions that I did, and my life might have turned out very differently. We finished our drinks in silence. I tried to start conversations again once or twice, but she only answered with yes or no, so it wasn't much good. In the end, when closing time was called by the pub landlord, we just said goodbye, and I caught the tube back into London. As the train made its way noisily through the darkness, I thought about the conversation I had just had, and I realized that it probably meant the end of the quartet. Oh well, I thought, I can join another one, or we'll find a new cellist. It doesn't matter. And then I suddenly saw Rachel's face, Rachel's sad, gentle face, and perhaps it was the drink, or perhaps it was because it was a warm summer's night, or perhaps I was just lonely, I don't know. But anyway, at the next station I got off the train, walked over the bridge, and got on the first train which was going back the way I had just come. Half an hour later, I was at the door of Rachel's house. I rang the bell. The door opened. "Derek," Rachel said in surprise. "I thought you'd gone home." "I was going to," I replied. "And then I just thought—" But I didn't really know what I had thought, so I kissed her instead. She didn't seem to mind, so I kissed her again. And it was very nice, and soon just kissing didn't seem to be enough, and, well, you can imagine the rest. The next morning we couldn't look at each other. We had gone too far, too fast. All I could think was that I had somehow betrayed Malgosia, which was ridiculous since she didn't love me, and all Rachel could think was that I had used her. It was raining when I reached the tube station. I didn't feel good and wondered how to cheer myself up. When I got back to my house, the first thing Ken said to me was, "Where have you been? You look awful." "Thanks," I said. "Thanks a lot." "Hey, don't you worry about it. You can sleep it off, whatever it was," Ken said. "I don't know," I answered. "Well, how about a coffee while you're thinking about it?" he offered. So we sat and talked, and I told him about Rachel, even though I knew I shouldn't. But I needed someone to talk to. "Well," he said when I had finished my story of the previous night, "things like that don't happen to me over here. Not yet, anyway. You're just lucky." "Then why don't I feel lucky?" I asked him. "Well, now," he laughed, "I can't help you there. Maybe you're crazy or something. Yes, that's probably it." And we laughed, and after half an hour in his company I felt better, because he didn't seem to think that I had done anything terrible, and because he let me tell him about Malgosia, and he didn't say that I was wasting my time. The next day the quartet met up outside Covent Garden tube station, as we had done every day since we started busking. I wasn't sure whether Rachel would be there, but she'd already arrived when I got out of the lift, which had brought me up from the depths of London, and walked out into the sunshine. She avoided my eyes and wouldn't talk to me at first, but later, when we were setting up at one end of the old market building and the other two were getting their violins out of their cases, she came up to me. "Derek," she said, "can we have a quick word?" "Yes," I said nervously. "It's just this," she announced seriously, looking away from me. "What happened, happened. I know that. But it's not going to happen again, is it?" "No," I said, and I meant it. "Right," she said in a controlled way. "And you want the quartet to continue, don't you?" "Yes. Yes, I think so." "So, can we just be friends?" she asked. I wonder how much that cost her. "If that's okay," I said. I felt a great sense of relief, to be honest. I'd expected more problems than this. "Yes, it is okay," she said, and started to walk away. But then she turned back, came right up to me, and for the first time that day she looked me full in the eyes. "One last thing," she whispered. "I don't want anyone else knowing about it. And we won't talk about it ever again. Okay?" "Okay," I agreed. She relaxed then, smiled at me, walked away again, and before long we were halfway through the first movement of the Mozart, and the money was falling into Ken's hat. But one afternoon, 2 weeks later, when we broke for lunch, Rachel refused to go on playing, and she wouldn't say why, and that was the end of our little band, at least for the time being. We watched her walking away, her head down. She hadn't said goodbye to anyone. "What was that all about?" Carl asked as Rachel disappeared round a corner. "Does anyone know what's going on?" We all looked at each other. Nobody had any idea. "What about you, Ken?" Matt said, as our money collector came towards us with 4 pints of beer on an old bar tray from the pub behind us. "What about what?" Ken answered. "Why did Rachel go off like that? Do you know?" "Me?" said Ken. "Why should I know? Don't ask me. Must be some musician thing. Why are you asking me?" "Hey," I told him, "don't be so defensive. I'm sure it wasn't your fault." But of course it was. His fault and my fault. Rachel and Ken had been walking towards the pub together, Ken told me later, and he'd asked her how she felt about me now. And Rachel had said, "What do you mean?" And Ken had answered, "You know, after that night of yours, that night together." And Rachel had stopped in the middle of the street, gone bright red, and said, "Who told you that? How do you know that? Did Derek tell you that?" Her voice getting louder with every question. Then she'd marched past Ken, packed up her cello, told us she was leaving, and walked away without a word of farewell. The summer holidays ended, and the autumn term at the academy began. There was no sign of Malgosia the first day, and she hadn't answered either of the letters I had sent her, so I was pretty miserable. I tried to talk to Rachel, but she refused to speak to me. I asked her, begged her to play with us again, and all she said was, "How can I play with you again? You told Ken all about us, didn't you? Why should I spend any more time in your company than I have to?" Things also weren't going well with my studies. My viola teacher was ill, and the man who took her place for that first week didn't like me, and I felt the same about him. My piano playing wasn't getting much better either. Carl and Matt wanted to get another cellist for our quartet, but somehow I could not agree to that. I'd already done enough damage there, and I still hoped one day that Rachel would change her mind. And Ken wouldn't talk to me because I had lost my temper with him about what he had said to Rachel. So I suppose you could say that my life was a mess. I was playing badly, I didn't have many friends, and the person I thought I loved had disappeared from my life. But not for long. One evening, 6 days after term started, I was sitting in my room watching a bad old Hollywood movie on my small television when someone knocked at my door. I opened it. Ken stood outside. "Hi," I said. "Come in. You haven't been around for a few days. Where have you been?" "Don't worry about where I've been," he replied, not looking me in the eye. "You've got more important things to think about." "What do you mean?" "There's someone downstairs to see you," he said, "and she doesn't look very happy." "Who is it?" I asked him. "I don't know," he replied. "I've never seen her before, but she's really lovely. If you're not interested, just let me know. I'd love to try and cheer her up." I left him and walked downstairs. The front door was still open. It was beginning to get dark outside, and a heavy rain was falling. Malgosia was standing in the passageway with 2 suitcases, her beautiful hair dripping wet, and a look of complete misery on her face.